Welcome to my session. I'm going to be talking about JavaScript and the recent additions and the future of the language. But first I would like to introduce myself. I'm Kuba Waliński. The one thing I would like you to know about me is that I love JavaScript. The other things are that's obviously how I look like. You can compare. That's how I look like on the less serious parts of the internet. I have a company called Happy Team. It's a company I started with a bunch of guys. We worked together in one team in a big corporation. We got a bit fed up. There was an opportunity that we seized, so we started this company. Right now the name is not exact because we have many teams now. So it's just happy teams right now, but people tend to be happy. We try to make sure that they are. I, for example, am happy when I'm programming with JavaScript, so that's okay. If you want to talk to me, you can chat with me after the presentation. There probably won't be much time for questions because it's quite a short session slot. And if you're shy or if you don't have time right now, you can hit me on email, you can hit me on Twitter. You can have a look at my GitHub. There are some materials, slides and code from various sessions that I give. They're all more or less in some way related to JavaScript. And I also put a logo of Dev Day, which is a developer conference in Krakow. We organize it together with a few of my friends. But basically they organize it, I try to help as much as I can. In Krakow in September, there were 6 editions so far, next edition next year, so I invite you to come. It's a really interesting event. And also, I have to say now, as a CEO of Happy Team, if you're interested in being happy at your work, contact me as well. We're also always looking for people, obviously, as everybody else. So now to the point, and the point is JavaScript. And that's more or less how I approached this topic about 3-4 years ago. If you told me that I'm supposed to be doing something in JavaScript, I would say like, why the hell, right? Are you sure we're not able to do this in the backend? Are you sure maybe the API can handle that? Okay, worst case, jQuery, right? That solves all the problems. I know jQuery, so I am a JavaScript god. But then, one day I got it, although it wasn't a eureka moment that just came out of the blue when I was sitting in the bathtub. It was more of a result of careful investigation and spending actual time to get a deeper relationship with the language. And for me, the biggest factor that contributed to my better understanding and in the end contributed to the fact that I actually really like JavaScript nowadays is a series of videos that you can find on YouTube by Douglas Crockford, who I recommend that you see his session later today. I've seen it in Krakow 2 days ago, it's really amazing. So yeah, so there's a series of videos on YouTube called Crockford on JS. It's about, I think, 8 parts. It's quite a time investment. I think in total it's about 10 hours, but it's well worth it. So you can get a good understanding of what JavaScript is all about. And I got it, I started getting involved, and then I started to be interested about the process of standardizing, how it's happening, why some features were added, why some others were not added. Turns out that the JavaScript is actually called EcmaScript because it's standardized by a body called ECMA, the European Computer Manufacturers Association. And there's the Technical Committee 39 in ECMA that deals with it. As you can imagine, working in a big committee with many parties, it can be quite a problem. If the deliberations get too long, the quality of your work really diminishes. And that's also what we've seen in JavaScript with some of the previous editions. They took like years and years to agree upon the standard, and it didn't reflect quite well on the quality of the features that were added. So it was a bit improved. One of the big improvements is that you can actually go to this GitHub page for the TC39 committee and you can see all the proceedings from the meeting. There is a lot of output that they produce because they want to be transparent. So that's quite good. So as I said, we call this language officially EcmaScript, just an interesting tidbit. Obviously JavaScript is trademarked by the people who own Java. so that's just an unofficial name, to be honest. ECMA was chosen to standardize JavaScript back in the time of the browser wars, and Netscape chose ECMA because they were looking for an ally to fight Microsoft, and ECMA has shown in the past that they are not afraid to stand up against Microsoft. Yeah, other standardization bodies were a bit afraid, or Netflix probably didn't trust them that they will be able to stand against Microsoft. And as I said, the previous versions of the standard were a bit big, with not too good quality, and it took lots of time, like years and years, both EcmaScript 5 and EcmaScript 6. There was a lot of time spent on actually agreeing what the features should be. Because those things take time, there are a lot of parties involved, everyone has particular interests, there's a lot of politics involved. And there are also interesting problems. For example, for years we've been missing a basic feature in JavaScript. On string, for example, we would like to see if a string contains another string. So you would expect to call string.contains and pass a string to and get true or false. That wasn't there, so for EcmaScript 6 they figured that it will be good to add that. But it turns out that MooTools, which is a JavaScript library used, for example, in Joomla, already implemented string contains, and they did it wrong. So if it was to be replaced by a better implementation, even though actually fixing something is good, it will break the existing code that is already on the internet. So they weren't able to do this. So they had to rename to string includes. And then, surprise, surprise, next year, the same thing happened when they wanted to add array contains. MooTools overridden this too, and it was also not the best implementation. So also we have array includes, and that's in the 2016 standards, or previously called ES7. Actually, from ES6 forward, we're moving to a release train method, so every year we're going to have a new version. It's already started working with ES7, ES 2016. And the basic mode of operation is that if you have some features ready by the end of the previous year, they go into the next year's spec. So for ES7, only 2 features were ready. Array includes, as I already mentioned, and the exponential operator, or the power operator, that I'll show you in one of my first code examples. Yeah, so the release train method is working because we managed to get another release on time, but the side effect is that there's not that many improvements that are going to appear every year, probably. Yeah, so why do we bother? Why do we need to keep extending and improving JavaScript? It's been working for a while on the web, it should be okay. Well, I'm going to argue that up until a few years ago, when we were using JavaScript, using jQuery or anything else, we're using it for like carousels on the website so that we have nice rotating images. Remember this killer feature? Every website had to have it. And then we also had accordions, right? So we can, oh wow, I can expand one panel and then collapse the other ones. Awesome stuff. So compared to those uses, what we're using JavaScript for today is basically rocket science, right? We have very complicated and complex frameworks like Angular, React, stuff like that. You can compile stuff to JavaScript. Basically, virtually any language that you can think of is most probably being able to be compiled to JavaScript. You can run like your first-person shooters in the browser. So that's why the language has to evolve to be adapted to those new uses, to the complex apps that you can create, to libraries, and to code generators that actually allow you to compile stuff. So if you want to start using EcmaScript 6 today, I'm sure most of you already know that. You can either use shims, which just implement the missing features, or you can use transpilers that basically take all your code and compile it to EcmaScript 5. Probably transpilers is a better option, at least to my mind. It makes it a bit simpler, although the shims give you this option that if there is a native implementation already present in the browser, then usually you're not using this shim, but you're using the native, which means that it might be a bit faster. If you want to start out trying to test the waters with EcmaScript 6, a very interesting feature is to transpile on the fly. All you have to do is in your HTML, you just attach the JS file from one of the transpilers, and then all your code is transpiled automatically on the fly. So if you just want to have a play with it and see how it works, it's a very easy way to start. Although the browsers are obviously getting better and better at implementing ES6 because it's already been like 1.5 years since it was ratified. Yeah, so now a quick walkthrough through my favorite features of ES6. Arrow functions is my most favorite one. So in ES5 you have to, when you have a callback function, you need to pass an anonymous function in there. It looks like that. Function, you pass the argument and return. Everything is mandatory, the function keyword, the curly brace, return statement, etc. Well, now you can do it like that. You can just specify argument, fat arrow, meaning that you use the equal sign, and then you specify what is returned, and that's all. That's equivalent to this notation. And also the same example here, and this operator that I mentioned, part of ES7, the second and the last part of the new standard for this year. So instead of writing x times x, you can write x star star 2, or you can, obviously the second argument also can be a variable. Yeah, so great. So we have a few less keywords, right? What's the big deal, right? Well, the big deal is, I'm sure most of you already met the problems with this keyword. This keyword is not always what you expect it to be. It's not always bound to what you expect it to be bound. Especially in such a context when you're passing an anonymous function and you try to use this inside this function. Then it turns out that this is actually undefined and the property name is not present. And even though you would expect name to be bound to the object that you're calling this anonymous function from. How we solve that? We obviously had somewhere in our code var self equal this, var that equal this, var whatever equal this, so that we can record the context before getting into the anonymous function. And then we can use self or this or whatever, and all works as expected. The side effect is that you will see var self equal this repeated thousands of times in each code base, basically every file. Fortunately, with arrow functions, you just pass an arrow function here and you don't bother, because this is bound to what it should be bound to. So it's pointing to this object that you called it from. I think that's a huge win, and I'm hoping in a few years it will be a thing of the past. And if you ask a junior developer, did you have any problems with this? What problems? What do you mean? It's great. It always works as expected. So I'm hoping that's how it's going to pan out. Secondly, we now have classes in JavaScript, which I wasn't so sure if it's a welcome addition. Let's have a look how it works. Obviously, you probably know that JavaScript is not really a class-based language. It's more of a prototype-based language. So you can have an object and it has a prototype. The prototype has a prototype, and that's basically how you implement hierarchy and inheritance, not with classes like you do in Java, C# or other similar languages. But because people were trying to simulate classes before, they decided to standardize that and to have a one way of pretending to have classes. Because all this syntax, this is just some syntactic sugar over constructor functions that we've been using before. But you can just use the class keyword, you can have a constructor inside the class, specify some properties, some methods, you can extend the class, very simple stuff, right? So you have kind vehicle, kind car, and then we use that to create an instance object, you might say. So we have a Mazda object that is of kind car, and the name is Mazda. And then you can try to figure out what's happening under the hood. So you see that the name property is actually on the Mazda object, but if you're looking for print name, which was the method on the parent class, it's not to be found on the parent class of Mazda, so it's not to be found on the car object. It's one level up, so it's on the parent of the car, so on the vehicle. So that's just to prove that it's actually under the hood is just plain old prototypal inheritance that you see everywhere else in JavaScript. Other interesting features, not that groundbreaking, but making our lives as developers easier. New way to present strings in JavaScript, very useful to my mind. So we use those backticks or inverted apostrophes, or however you want to call them. That's what you get when you press the tilde key with a shift pressed down. And if you do this, those strings have very nice properties. You can use the special characters in them, and they'll be printed as expected. You can have multi-line strings, which is very useful in, for example, in Angular 2. They use it a lot because you can define the HTML templates inside the JavaScript files, so it's easier to read them if they're in multiple lines. You can finally put your variables inside the strings directly. You don't have to do like string plus space plus variable plus space, because you always get those spaces mixed up, so you're too many or too little. So with this you can actually format the string as you want, and $, curly brace, put the variable name, and it doesn't have to be a simple variable name. It can be a more complex expression as well, like in the second example. So basically makes our lives a lot easier, makes the code more readable, which I think is the biggest achievement. A few more interesting tidbits. Destructuring. I've been to a session about Elixir today, which is a functional programming language based on Erlang. And I've seen similar examples like that, and it was even called pattern matching, so something that functional programmers are really hot on. So you might say we have proper pattern matching in this respect in JavaScript now as well. So JavaScript is becoming more and more functional, which also fills my heart with joy. So we can destruct this array and say, okay, first element goes into variable A, I ignore the second element, the third element goes into B, and the fourth goes into C. And if the fourth is not present, it will be 4. And as you can see, that's exactly what we get. And you can do the same with objects. So you have this object with keys x, y, z, and you say, I take x, y, z, but z I want to be renamed to a surprise variable, and I'm also looking for a w. And then w was not present, so it's undefined, and x, y surprise is as you would expect. Now you can also make use of that in this interesting case. Let's say that getPerson is an API method. You need to call it to get only the name of the person, but it also returns lots and lots of other information, right? Company, date of birth, whatever. But you want to only use the name, so you can specify it right away and put it into a variable called myName. This is useful because you're explicitly stating to whoever is maintaining your code or changing it later on, or code reviewing it, or fixing a bug. You're explicitly stating that I'm only interested in this one bit from this API. So again, your code is more readable, and you'll thank yourself for it when you're maintaining it 3 months later. And finally, you can do the same when you're passing an object as an argument to a function. You can change, for example, the name to variable x, and then it works as expected, as you can see. There is some more syntactic sugar. Basically, syntactic sugar was big part of this release was some improvements in the syntax, which I'm really thankful for because I really enjoy those new features. So finally you have default values for functions, and those default values are even a bit more involved than you expect from other languages, because you can have default value for one of the variables depend on some of the previous ones. So it's an interesting idea. And finally, you have this ellipsis operator, the 3 dots, and you can use it in 2 different, very distinct ways. When you use it like that in the argument list of a function, it's called the rest operator because it combines all of the arguments that you pass to the function into an array. So in this case, the first argument is passed into variable x, local variable x, and all the other ones are combined into an array y. So as you can see later on, when we log the y array, we get hello and true, the second and third argument. It replaces the arguments object that was there before, but we couldn't always rely on it because it was an array-like object, not really an array, so there were some quirks in how it behaves. When you use the rest operator, you get a proper JavaScript array, so no surprises there. And once again, you can use the ellipsis operator a bit like the other way around, to be honest. When you have a function, It accepts a list of arguments, but you happen to have those arguments inside an array, no problem. You use the spread operator, and the array is spread and can be applied as parameters to the function. Obviously, this also could be done before with some functions on the function prototype, but this is just much easier and much friendlier. And another big achievement for me that was solved, a problem that was solved in ES6, is the variable scope problem. The variable scope problem comes from the fact that when you use var to define a variable in JavaScript, it has a function scope. So it's visible everywhere inside the function. So even though I define y here, it's visible here before I defined it, and it's visible here after the curly brace block ended. And that actually was quite surprising to people who were new to JavaScript. I'm sure there have been thousands and thousands of errors, thousands and thousands of hours of programming hours wasted banging your head against your keyboard trying to figure out what's going on and why JavaScript is such a strange language. So right now we have this problem solved. We have a let keyword where you can define a variable that has standard scope, so it's just the scope ends together with the curly brace. So in this case you have x defined here. It's not visible and not available before. It's visible here in a sub-block, but right here this block ends and x is no longer available. And we have const that has the same scoping rules, but it's just a constant value. So again, hopefully in a few years no one will ever use var anymore. We use let and const and we'll forget about all the problems. Won't that be great? And modules. A very interesting addition because it wasn't part of the standard before. So there were competing standards like AMD and CommonJS. And basically every package manager had the preference. People were very passionate about it, arguing which standard is better. Now we have the answer. This is the better standard because it's part of the official JavaScript spec. So you can have a map.js function, for example. You can export a few things from it. And then you can import it just by passing the name of the file where you want to import it from, skipping the extension. And you can either import everything into a namespace, or you can just select exact things that you want to import. Even better, you can define a default export from a function, and then when you have this default export, you don't need the curly braces to like extract it from this. You can just pass the variable name directly. And I actually recommend to just have one default export for all the library, for all the modules that you use. It makes the code much simpler. That's more or less it for a quick overview of my favorite features. There are lots and lots more features in ES6, that's why it took so long to ratify. There are those features and more, even more. I've just passed here an interesting link if you're interested in generators, although you will learn later today when you go to Douglas' session why you shouldn't do that, so maybe just hold off. Finally, resources. The first link is the link to the slides that you're just seeing, so if it caught your attention, you want to have a look later on. slides.com/Kuba/Waliński/FutureJS. Quite simple to remember that. Some links that came up during the presentation, and the most important bit is the playlist on YouTube with those videos created by Douglas. So finally, what the future of JS might be. Obviously, I'm not that qualified to give you a definitive answer. I can just speculate a little bit. I'm really happy to see that many old errors that were plaguing us from the beginning of JavaScript were corrected. I'm thinking mostly about this and variable scope and a few other less important issues. Hopefully, it's been a year and a half with the new standard, and I don't think I've seen any major new errors introduced with those new features, so at least It seems that it took a long time to ratify this new standard, but maybe it will pay off and the quality of the features is better than we've seen before. JavaScript is certainly getting a lot more powerful. New and new frameworks are coming up, new ways to use the language. It might even, it's an idea favored by Brendan Eich, the creator of JavaScript. I've seen a few talks where he said that he expects the JavaScript to become a virtual machine for the web, a sort of an assembly language for the web, if you will. So probably we might forget about JavaScript in a few years because you'll be able to, basically today you're able to write in any language and will be compiled into JavaScript for you. And to me myself, I have to admit that discovering those new features and using them every day for the past year or so has been really exciting. It's as if you have a new language to learn, a new language to play with, a new language to figure out what the new usages may be, what new patterns, what new libraries be created. I think it's a very exciting time to be a JavaScript developer. And I expect that new patterns and new libraries and new usages for the features will emerge. And also I would like to stress two things. In the past, it took a really long time for the browser vendors to implement the new features in ES5, for example. We waited a good few years before they were ready. Right now, as you know, we have evergreen browsers, meaning that they update automatically without even asking for permission. So that actually speeds up the rate of adoption very much. So hopefully the ES6 and 7 standard will be implemented fully in a much shorter time. And secondly, I want to stress also that this is not just some theoretical stuff that you need to wait for the browser adoption. You can use the transpilers, etc., and you can use it on production. I myself, I'm a champion of using ES6 on production in my company. So we have a big client in the UK, and we have thousands of users using the live system with all the code written in ES6, classes, REST operators, thread operators, you name it. So all the features that I've shown you today are stuff that I actually see when I log into, when I open Atom and see what's inside my repository. So I encourage you to do the same. And that's it.